Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Mr. Bad Paramahansa Buddhika Acharya Ashtotar the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Buddhika Acharya Ashtotar the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Jayananda Prabhu Ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Now, we're almost finished with this chapter, but I've completely forgotten, as usual, exactly where we are.
I think 52.
What did you say?
52.
50? 50?
52.
Okay. You think we did 51? Oh, you asked me about Janardhan, yeah.
Yeah, we did the 51 and today is 52.
52. Okay. So, give me a second. Sorry. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 24th day of May, 2021 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we're also going to hear some more about Jayananda Prabhu. Hare Krishna. So tonight we're studying in the 11th canto of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by Srila Prabhupada, chapter 11, the Universal Form, text 52. Page 498. Shri Bhagavana Vacha Sudurdarsham Idam Rupam Drishtavan Asiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityam Darshanakankshinaha. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Sudurdarshamidang Rupam Drishtavanasiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityang Darshanakankshinaha. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Sudurdarshamidang Rupam Drishtavanasiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityang Darshanakankshinaha. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Sudurdarshamidam Rupam Drishtavanasiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityam Darshanakankshinaha. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Sudurdarshamidam Rupam Drishtavanasiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityang Darshanakankshinaha. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Sudurdarshamidang Rupam Drishtavanasiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityang Darshanakankshinaha. Meet me one try. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Sudurdarshamidang Rupam Drishtavanasiyan Mama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityam Darshanakankshinaha. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said, Sudurdarsham, very difficult to see. Idam, this, Rupam, form, Drishtavan asi, as you have seen, Yat, which, Mama, of mine, Devaha, the demigods, Api, also, Asya, this, Rupasya, form, Nityam, eternally, Darshanakankshinaha, aspiring to see. Glenn, just a little bit more. Thanks. Translation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjun, this form of mine you are now seeing is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form, which is so dear. Purport. In the 48th verse of this chapter, Lord Krishna concluded, revealing his universal form, and informed Arjuna that this form is not possible to be seen by so many pious activities, sacrifices, etc. Now here the word Sudurdarsham is used, indicating that Krishna's two-handed form is still more confidential. One may be able to see the universal form of Krishna by adding a little tinge of devotional service to various activities like penances, Vedic study, and philosophical speculation. It may be possible, but without a tinge of bhakti one cannot see. That has already been explained. Still, beyond that universal form, the form of Krishna with two hands is still more difficult to see, even for demigods like Brahma and Lord Shiva. They desire to see him, and we have evidence in the Srimad Bhagavatam that when he was supposed to be in the womb of his mother Devaki, all the demigods from heaven came to see the marvel of Krishna, and they offered nice prayers to the Lord, although he was not at that time visible to them. They waited to see him. A foolish person may deride him, thinking him an ordinary person, and may offer respect not to him but to the impersonal something within him, but these are all nonsensical postures. Krishna in his two-armed form is actually desired to be seen by demigods like Brahma and Shiva. In the Bhagavad Gita 9:11 it is also confirmed, Avajananti mamudha manushim tanam ashritam. He is not visible to the foolish persons who deride him. Krishna's body, as confirmed by the Brahma Samhita and confirmed by Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita, is completely spiritual and full of bliss and eternality. His body is never like a material body, But for some who make a study of Krishna by reading the Bhagavad Gita or similar Vedic scriptures, Krishna is a problem. For one using a material process, Krishna is considered to be a great historical personality and very learned philosopher. But he is an ordinary man. And even though he was so powerful, he had to accept the material body. Even though he was so powerful, he had to accept the material body. Ultimately, they think that the absolute truth is impersonal. Therefore, they think that from his impersonal feature, he assumed a personal feature attached to material nature. This is a materialistic calculation of the Supreme Lord. Another calculation is speculative. Those who are in search of knowledge also speculate on Krishna and consider him to be less important than the universal form of the Supreme. Thus, some think that the universal form of Krishna, which was manifested to Arjuna, is more important than his personal form. According to them, the personal form of the Supreme is something imaginary. They believe that in the ultimate issue, the absolute truth is not a person. But the transcendental process is described in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, to hear about Krishna from authorities. That is the actual Vedic process, and those who are actually in the Vedic line hear about Krishna from authority. And by repeated hearing about him, Krishna becomes dear. As we have several times discussed, Krishna is covered by his Yogamaya potency. He is not to be seen or revealed to anyone and everyone. Only by one to whom he reveals himself can he be seen. This is confirmed in the Vedic literature. For one who is a surrendered soul, the absolute truth can actually be understood. The transcendentalist, by continuous Krishna consciousness and by devotional service to Krishna, can have his spiritual eyes opened and can see Krishna by revelation. Such a revelation is not possible even for the demigods. Therefore it is difficult even for the demigods to understand Krishna, and the advanced demigods are always in hope of seeing Krishna in his two-handed form. The conclusion is that although to see the universal form of Krishna is very, very difficult and not possible for anyone and everyone, it is still more difficult to understand his personal form as Shyamasundar. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So this whole section, in fact, a large part of this chapter is about seeing Krishna in his various forms. And it's not just the Shyamasundar form that we need Krishna's grace in order to see, but also the universal form. Arjuna asked to see the universal form, and he couldn't see him with the present eyes. He had to get the special eyes of divine eyes so that he could see this amazing, all-encompassing form. And now here we are at the end of the chapter. Arjuna no longer wants to see this form, which is frightening. And he wants to see first the forearm form, and then Krishna will reveal the most confidential form, which he already has, which is the two-handed form. And what is it about that two-handed form that's so special? It is that only with that human-like form can we experience this wide variety of relationships, of rasa. The one relationship with the universal form is fear and trembling, and hope that you'll survive the experience. I mean, you remember he's crushing the heads of all the army, powerful soldiers, Maharathis. I mean, Arjuna was like, he's a great warrior. He's not afraid of dying. But it was frightening. He confessed it was frightening. So the whole point here is that the point of the whole bhakti process is to get the grace of Krishna. In other words, nothing is possible without his. We can't take one breath without his blessing. And we're going to strut and fret our day on the stage. Remember Shakespeare? Anyone who's been in American, I don't know if they still teach Shakespeare. Struts, this is a tale told by an idiot. Remember that? Macbeth. I forget the whole speech. We used to learn that, But in various parts of the literature, and Jayadvaita Maharaj wrote a whole book about the passage in the Bible I forget what it is, Ecclesiastes or something, where he's basically just saying how senseless it is, you know. I remember I read that whole book because he gave it to me to proofread. I found a few little things, believe it or not. And I had the impression, you know, he came to the real conclusion that there's no meaning to all of this struggle and attempts to enjoy and find security. There's two things you need, yoga and kshema. Everyone is looking for yoga and kshema. Yoga are the things and the experiences and everything you need to feel happy. But then there's the kshema part. Kshema means security. Means that, yes, now I have all the money and I have the wife and I have everything together. But if there's an army coming over the hill and it's going to kill her, what's the use of it? You know? So those two things have to be there. But where can they possibly find those? You know, we're all in the grip of time. Time is destroying everything. Krishna is 3 times in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, time I am. In this very chapter, right? I just come to destroy everything. Who can deny it? So it's a grand illusion to try to imagine that you can find any security and happiness, lasting happiness here. It's all just a big, what should I say, con? You know, it's an illusion presented by Maya to keep us fooled. Until, you know, because she's a servant of Krishna, until we, as Prabhupada mentions in this purport, we take the humble position, as Arjuna did. He was, of course, able to approach Krishna directly as his guru, but approached Krishna's pure representative, who's not out to cheat us, who has actually realized Tattvadarshi. Here again, the word for seeing. Prabhupada refers to that verse in the fourth chapter. We should really know that verse, 434. Tadvidi panipatena padipashnena padiprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshana. Let's look at 434. It'll only take a minute. The translation you have has been reverted back actually to the previous one. Bottom of page 220. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Here we again we have Tattvadarshi. Darshana, this is all about seeing. So there's a formula there. First of all, you have to find someone who's seen the truth. That's not so easy. That's another kind of cheating. When you start searching and searching, if you're not fortunate, you'll find a cheater. Remember, right at the beginning of Bhagavatam, first chapter, it describes the nature of this age. Prayanalpayashak sabya kalavasman yugejana manda sumanda matayo manda bhagya upadrita. So the first thing is prayena, for the most part, and that applies to all of these elements. You know, for the most part, you don't live very long. These Kali Yugites, you know, if you live to be 85, you know that's, and then the next question is, what about your faculties? You know, if you can't think straight, you know, you have had irregular habits, and it really doesn't really matter if you live long. But the idea is that it may take a long time to get realized. So they don't live very long. And if you do live long, they say, manda, lazy in the matter of spiritual life. You know, who's really serious about it? You may speculate here and there. You may spend a year or two of your youthful days, you know, searching and this and that. But then you got to get down to work. You got to get serious, you know, and pay your bills. That's what's really important. So manda. And then if you are serious, so manda matayo, you're probably going to be misguided by one of the cheaters. There's a big market out there. The foolish Americans, they have all the money. They're curious about this and that. All right, we'll go over there, we'll, you know, pretend to be an avatar and this and that, you know. I don't know if they're still coming, but in the 60s and the early 70s, it was a big crop, you know. So manda bhagya, therefore, very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. And upadrita, there's so many disturbances. Just now, the fashion is, when it gets a little warmer, the guys on their motorcycles come out to try to agitate you with their you know, they take off their mufflers, whatever it is, you know, and a big group of them come around. And the whole purpose is, you know, one of the things is to try to make the alarms go off in the cars, right? What is that? That's mode of ignorance, you know. So that's upadrata. There's always something to disturb you. So with all of these things, what chance do we have? The only chance we have, and that's going to come into our nice talk about Jayananda. I have a picture of him that I want to hand out. And I have a nice... okay, that's good. A nice account of some of his pastimes. This morning I also heard online, very nice. Mostly dealt with his qualities and so forth. But how did they manifest in his activities? This wonderful account was written by Kalakanta Prabhu, who runs the Gainesville Center now. I'm going to read that, and I'll hand her out this picture. There's a story behind the picture, too. So, Jayananda, he was searching, but he was, where to go? Okay, I'll go to San Francisco, But he was depressed. He had got a degree, not from San Jose. He got a degree from Ohio. He was a college graduate engineer, something like that. But he was confused and everything. And he was even suicidal, it's mentioned, in some part. So he walks in the storefront. Everyone went to Haight-Ashbury. I went there, as a tourist, basically. But I went, it was a place of pilgrimage in the 60s. And he walks into the storefront, and there's Prabhupada. And he was giving class in the morning, and usually the hippies are sleeping it off in the morning. So oftentimes he was the only one in the class. Can you imagine? Getting straight, Prabhupada is he just had some success in New York, and he came to California, and he had this big, the story. It was a big concert, a lot of people in. Anyway. So then he'd be there alone, and sometimes Prabhupada would invite him to breakfast and feed him, and so he was blessed. So that's what it takes. It takes the reaching out of a pure devotee, especially in this age, to find those who are receptive and give what it takes in the way they can accept it, which is a real art, so that they'll take up the process of chanting the holy name, in this age. So without that, you may be the most greatest intellect from Brahma. What happened to Brahma? He was bewildered, you remember? He couldn't, by his power, mystic power, it was useless. He couldn't understand it, Krishna. But he surrendered, and he offered his prayer. And he had that wonderful verse. Atapite deva padam bhajadriya prasadaleshan ugadevi. My dear Lord, unless one gets at least a little bit of your mercy, they cannot understand you. Janatvi tattvam bhagavan mahimno. Exactly, mahimna. It means the glories. We heard in the last chapter and even more in this chapter, the glory and the power of God. No one can understand it without your grace. Even though they may be the greatest scholars, they study the Vedas for millions of years. Because it's all revelatory. It all depends on Krishna revealing. And he only responds to devotion. He only responds to love. You can't, break down the walls and then find out what Krishna is. It's not like that. He responds to devotion, and that's what this is all about. So I wanted to leave time because this is a little substantial. So we're going to leave it there tonight. We'll definitely finish the chapter on Wednesday, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's a big festival, but yeah, we'll finish this chapter on Wednesday. And now I'd like to hand this out. This is a picture. It's kind of heavy, so you have to hold it with 2 hands. This is one of these old iPads. This is the wonderful picture of Jayananda. It appeared on the cover of Back to Godhead magazine. In we're gonna hand it out. We're handing it around too. This was the 1976 Rath Yatra in New York. It was the first New York Rath Yatra. Prabhupada came. As many devotees as possible came. I couldn't go. I was stuck in L.A. I had no money to go. No time. But I was working on BTG, and so this is now the next year. This is almost a year later. Jayananda had actually departed by this time. This is the June issue of the Back to Godhead magazine, and he departed on May 1st of that year, right the day before the Sringa Chaturdashi that year. And so there's a letter in this magazine also. I think that was mentioned in this morning, that Prabhupada wrote to Jayananda after he left. He says, "I'm really feeling your separation." It's a beautiful letter. That's in this magazine too. But we're saying, well, what picture are we going to use of Jayananda? And this one just arrived in the mail. I was working in the office of BTG. It's a perfect picture. what he's doing there, he's leading the first cart in the New York Rath Yatra. It was a historic event, as I mentioned. And he worked so hard, as he always did, you know, and he already was feeling some of the effects of the leukemia, you know, but he worked and worked. And here he's, you know, triumphantly leading that front cart down Fifth Avenue with hundreds of devotees chanting like crazy. And Prabhupada, he would always ride on Subhadra's cart, you know. So it's a wonderful story. And I'm going to just read this account. Now, this was put together by Kalakanta. It's really wonderful. And he interviewed a lot of devotees. And so you're going to get some ideas about who he was and what he did. Because I think most of you here probably haven't heard this before. You've been around for years. You've heard it many times. The Life of Jayananda Prabhu by Kalakanta Das. I think we have time to finish it. It's a few pages. After the disappearance of Jayananda Dasa on May 1st, 1977, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada instructed devotees all over the world to commemorate the event every year as they would any great Vaishnav's disappearance day, and that's what we're doing today. Therefore, we respectfully submit these pages to all devotees and friends of ISKCON as a means to remember and understand more about Jayananda's devotional service. Of course, we will see how he joined ISKCON and how he left this mortal world. More importantly, we shall see the astounding qualities possessed by a true devotee, a sincere disciple, and genuine servant of Srila Prabhupada. So this is broken into little sections. First is Jayananda's beginnings in Krishna consciousness. Jayananda was the all-American boy, handsome, strong, intelligent, born in a more than middle-class family. Jayananda took a degree in mechanical engineering from Ohio State University. With a background like that, it is surprising that Jayananda ended up as a cab driver in San Francisco. So he was searching, you know. This is early 67. Karunda once asked him why he didn't get a better paying job, and he said, "I didn't fit in with the upper class crowd," he said. Always introspective in nature, Jayananda felt empty and unsatisfied within himself during his college years. He would often say that he was never happy before joining Krishna consciousness. His depression was almost suicidal when, in 1967, he read a small article in a San Francisco paper about an Indian Swami who had come to the Bay Area to propagate the chanting of the names of God. Jayananda recalled feeling, quote, a ray of hope when he read that article. Thinking the Swami may have something to offer, Jayananda made up his mind to attend the Swami's lectures. So this was at that first temple in Frederick Street. You may have read it in the Lilamrita. I advise you to read that Lilamrita. It's a wonderful account in detail. Srila Prabhupada's early lectures in the Bay Area were mostly attended by hippies, and Jayananda was one of the only straight people there. Jayananda later recalled, quote, "I wasn't much of a religionist, but I was attracted to Srila Prabhupada." Close quote. He was especially fond of attending the early morning lectures because at that hour most of the hippies would be in bed. On some occasions, Jayananda would be the only guest listening to Srila Prabhupada speak from the Bhagavatam. Imagine the good fortune. Srila Prabhupada was always fond of Jayananda, and sometimes he would invite his budding disciple to take prasadam with him in his room. Quote, Srila Prabhupada would cook prasad and serve me, Jayananda recalled. He didn't say anything. He just kept feeding me, and I kept eating. Close quote. You've already heard how much he loved prasadam. Jayananda soon donated his life savings of $5,000 to Srila Prabhupada to help His Divine Grace print the Bhagavad Gita as it is. I have a inflation calculating app, you know, $40,000 in today's dollars. That's how much the inflation, $40,000. You can imagine. And then again, at the end, another $40,000. As more and more devotees joined ISKCON in the Bay Area, Jayananda continued to work as a cab driver and supported the temple by contributing all his earnings. Okay, Jayananda, the next section, Jayananda's attraction for the process of Krishna consciousness. Chandanacharya Prabhu remembers this special feature about Jayananda. Quote, he was completely enamored by Krishna consciousness. Even when he'd go out on incense runs, all by himself, he would rise every morning before 4, have a little Mangalarti, chant all his rounds, read and cook prasadam. He never deviated. Now, this incense runs, I don't know if you're familiar with that, if you don't read haven't read the Lilamrita, but we had there's a business, I don't know if it's still around, called Spiritual Sky Incense. And it was also, they had little fragrant oils like we put on the deity, but not, you know, not as high quality. And a lot of grahastas were able to support themselves, by being part of the business. So that's what he's talking about here. And he was probably doing just to support the temple, because they didn't have the big book distribution going on at first, When he go out incense runs all by himself, he would rise very early in the morning at 4, have a little mangalartik, chant his rounds, and cook prasadam. He never deviated. He loved it. He was completely happy as long as he was practicing Krishna consciousness. Take prasadam. This is still Chandanacharya. Take prasadam, for example. Jayananda worshipped prasadam. When a little prasadam spilled on the floor, he would always bend down on all fours and lick it up. He loved to cook, offer, distribute, and eat prasadam in a big way. He would always take prasadam with him and distribute it, whether he was making a boga run, buying bulk foods from the market, or taking a chanting party downtown. He would even say prasadam. You see, you can say prasadam, or even prasad. Prabhupada almost always said prasadam, but if you put prasadam, you get that sh, which is the Bengali thing, you can't resist it. Prasadam. Take some prasadam. He would even say prasadam in a special way that made you immediately want to take some. Close quote. That's it for Chandanacharya. Jayananda knew how to attract people to Krishna consciousness with the prasadam weapon. When a new devotee came, for example, Jayananda would see to it that he was sumptuously fed with prasadam. When Jambavan Das was just becoming a devotee, Jayananda would bring him a plate of prasadam so big. He's a very big guy. I knew Jambavan. He would drive the BBT truck. At a certain point, they were delivering books all over the country, and he would drive that big truck, and take the books off and deliver them to the different temples. Okay. When Jambavan was becoming a devotee, Jayananda would bring him a plate of prasadam so big that he thought he could never eat it all. When he finally did finish the plate, Jayananda immediately put an identical plate down before him. I can't eat that, said Jambavan. Srila Prabhupada said that we should eat till we waddle like a duck. Jambavan would finish the second plate. Of course, Jayananda himself could be found honoring large quantities of prasadam any time, day or night. He was the kind of devotee who would come up to you at 10 o'clock at night with some peanut butter halva and say, "Hey, Prabhu, come here, check this out." Another example of his attachment to Krishna consciousness is Jayananda's love for kirtan. Jayananda was always eager to take the whole temple out on Harinam chanting parties. He had a special attraction for chanting in the streets. Whether kirtan was held in the temple or in the street, Jayananda would always be seen dancing and chanting enthusiastically. When he was making Maharaj Das into a devotee, Jayananda would visit his house and have big kirtans. I knew him also. He became a major book distributor for years in L.A. He visited here once, stayed at my place. When he was making Maharaj Das into a devotee, Jayananda would visit his house and have big kirtans. Even if there were only 2 of them, they would be jumping and chanting, "Jai-go, Haribol!" Also, Karunda recalls how one day, after working very hard for 10 hours straight, Jayananda suddenly announced, "Hey, it's 10 to 7. Let's go to Arti." Everyone else was so tired that Arti was the last thing on their minds. But Jayananda quickly jumped in the shower and then bounced down to the temple room for Arti. Of all the processes of Krishna consciousness, Jayananda was most attached to preaching. Whether it was during the Sunday feast, while making incense runs, or while building Rath Yatra carts, Jayananda was always trying to find some person with whom he could share his ecstasy in Krishna consciousness. His preaching was very simple and easy to listen to. We just have to keep chanting and have faith in the name. We just have to chant and take prasadam. Srila Prabhupada is so kind to give us such a simple process. Karunda remembers how Jayananda preached to him on his first day in the temple. As they worked together preparing a little garden for Srila Prabhupada at the old Los Angeles temple, Jayananda said, things don't always go just right in Krishna consciousness. You have to keep chanting. At the time, Karunda couldn't imagine how anything could go wrong in Krishna's service. Years later, however, as he found himself still remembering those words, Karunda could appreciate the real potency of what Jayananda had said. Quote, Karunda, "So many things may come and go, just have faith in the name." As Jayananda had said, so many things may come and go, just have faith in the name. Jayananda's preaching was very attractive for the non-devotees. Chandanacharya recalls seeing Jayananda engaged in preaching late one night. It was 11:30, and Jayananda was up fixing a broken-down Sankirtan van. As he lay on his back working under the van, he preached to two hippies who were standing nearby. All they could see of him was a pair of legs. But they stood by listening, completely absorbed as Jayananda worked and preached away. As soon as he felt the person was at all ready, Jayananda would preach to him about chanting and about Srila Prabhupada. There was no protocol or strict etiquette, just sincere and confidential glorification of Krishna. True to his character, Jayananda was often seen preaching to guests from his wheelchair, even during his last days in this world. Devotees who knew him could tell from a distance exactly what he was saying. You just have to have faith in the name. And you heard about how he was preaching down in Tijuana. Yeah, I heard that's a famous story. Jayananda's humility. Humility was certainly Jayananda's most prominent quality. He treated everyone as a superior, even new devotees. Maharaj Das remembers that Jayananda was always asking his advice. Hey, Bhakta Mike, what do you think of this? Although his service was glorious, he never wanted any glory. He avoided praise like the plague. Devotees got to know that if they wanted to be around him, they better not praise Jayananda. Otherwise, he would simply leave. Once, when he was with Dhanavir, someone came to Jayananda and began praising him. Jayananda just ignored it. Later he returned to Dhanavir and said, you know, if you've been around this movement a few years, people naturally offer you some respect. Close quote. Not that his service or qualities were so great. He just was around a few years, was his humble thinking. If he ever spoke about himself at all, Jayananda would speak so humbly that Lochan Das recalls, it was difficult not to think of yourself as being better than him. If you had any reason to be puffed up, Jayananda would bring it out in you. Close quote. Feeling himself unworthy, Jayananda would step aside so that others could lead kirtan, give classes, or do arti. Instead, he could be found fixing cars, unplugging toilets, washing dishes, or taking out the trash. We need someone like that here. Once a new boy came to visit the San Francisco temple. He wanted to help, so Keshava Das sent him to the trash area where Jayananda was preparing the weekly trash run. Jayananda told the boy, I'm the garbage man around here. For years I've been watching garbage men carry out trash, and now Krishna has given me a chance to do this for him. The boy not only helped load the trash, but accompanied Jayananda to the garbage dump. Later that boy became a devotee, and he recalled thinking, if the garbage men at this temple can be so blissful, just imagine what the rest of the devotees are like. Karanda recalls another incident of Jayananda's humility. One day, before Rath Yatra, I spent the whole day running around with Jayananda. By the time we got back to the temple, it was midnight. The whole building was so crowded that we couldn't find any space to lie down. I think you heard a version of that this morning. The whole building was so crowded. Finally, we found room in one little storage closet. I was so tired that all I could do was throw my sleeping bag on the floor and lie down. Then I saw Jayananda walking out of the room. I asked him, where are you going? He said he'd be right back. But I kept pressing him, and finally he explained that he had some rounds of japa chanting to finish up. He didn't want to keep me awake by chanting in our room, nor did he want me to feel bad because he was going out to do something else. He just wanted to slip away to some corner and fulfill his vow. I remember saying, sometimes it's not possible to finish all one's rounds because there's so much work to do. That's okay, he said. I'm not too tired. I was amazed not only by his consideration for me, but by his full submission to Srila Prabhupada. Although perfectly qualified, Jayananda was reluctant to take a post as temple president or sannyasi. It was not that he wouldn't or couldn't do it. He would do whatever was asked of him. He was happiest just to be working under someone. In this way, he was the backbone of the Bay Area's ISKCON temple for years. Through frequently changing administrations, he would always faithfully serve the acting temple president. He was very special, and yet no one paid any special attention to him. That was just the way he liked things. Jayananda's service attitude. Jayananda was always ready to do whatever was necessary to push on Krishna consciousness. He was expert at everything: cooking, preaching, deity worship, public relations, sankirtan, selling incense, construction, and everything else it takes to run a temple. He was a tireless worker. He would be the first one up in the morning, the last one to sleep at night. It was Jayananda who was always running out to get the flowers, Jayananda who was washing dishes and washing the pots and making sure the kitchen was clean, Jayananda who was often missing class while he was out doing some service, and Jayananda who was always encouraging others to go out and preach and setting the example himself. Whatever assignment he was given, he would always get done. even if he had to suffer personally for it. No matter how hard he was working, he would never stop for a nap during the day. He seemed inexhaustible. Jambavan remembers that many times the San Francisco devotees would go out to Berkeley to distribute the leftover prasadam after a Sunday feast. Quote, first Jayananda would be in the kitchen cleaning. Then someone would say, hey, how about this leftover prasadam? Jayananda would say, okay, first let's get this kitchen clean. He would organize the cleanup crew and then work twice as hard as anyone else. Then he would transfer the prasadam, load it and the devotees into the van, drive the van to Berkeley, organize the distribution of prasadam, and lead the kirtan while we distributed. In later years, when he was with the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party, Jayananda would help manage and sustain the traveling bus program and simultaneously do all-day Sankirtan day in and day out. That's book distribution. Side by side with the brahmacharis scarcely half his age. In spite of his advanced position and seniority, he never asked for any special treatment. Leading devotees would often describe him as, quote, the most advanced devotee in the movement. Jayananda's freedom from fault-finding. Those who knew Jayananda always noticed one remarkable quality about him. He could not criticize others. It was against his nature. Even if a devotee did something which warranted criticism, Jayananda would usually say nothing, or else something that made the mistake appear to be perfectly understandable. No matter who was giving class or leading kirtan, he would always appreciate it. He never spoke harsh words or chastised anybody. If one devotee was criticizing another within earshot of Jayananda, Jayananda would simply leave. Rather than criticize others, Jayananda would contribute nothing less than positive Krishna-conscious energy to any situation. Sometimes devotees would bring up their expansive aspirations for spreading Krishna consciousness. Jayananda would always encourage their ideas, however extraordinary. At the same time, he was no fool. He could always pick the right man to do a particular duty. Because he knew how to encourage people, the temple leaders would always assign new men to work with Jayananda. He saw no distinction between new devotee and old devotee. Both were his superiors. He could quickly give a new man a sense of identity and a feeling that he belonged in Krishna consciousness. A true Vaishnava, he was expert at fanning any little spark of Krishna consciousness into a big fire. Few will dispute the claim that Jayananda made more devotees and helped more pull through than anyone else in the movement. Jayananda as dear to everyone. We may not be able to finish this. Like the six Goswamis, Jayananda was dear both to the gentle and the ruffians. He was as much at home with the Italians at the produce market as with the brahmacharis in the temple. He would make friends on street Sankirtan, and they would often come up to him and say, "Hey, where have you been?" Once a devotee was approached by a staggering drunk in San Francisco. The drunk looked at his robes and asked the devotee, "Hey, where's my old friend Jayananda?" Many devotees, including Dhanavir and Chandanacharya, had the experience of taking over Jayananda's old territory on incense-selling runs or boga runs. They would meet people who said such things as, "Hey, where's Jayananda?" Or, "That man, he's the nicest and most pure man I've ever met." One man told Chandanacharya, "Well, I don't know much about your philosophy, but if that Jayananda's into it, it must be all right." Once near the Rathayatra cart work site, Jayananda invited Keshava to step inside a bar and meet some friends of his. They walked inside, and immediately some 25 faces looked up and smiled brightly. Someone said, "Oh, this must be your friend you were telling us about, the temple president." They presented the two devotees with a sack full of vegetarian groceries, which they had chipped in together to buy. Among the devotees, Jayananda was like a big brother, always compassionate and willing to listen to them. But devotees rarely burdened him with their problems. "When you were around Jayananda," said Karandar, "you had no problems." The devotees loved Jayananda and talked about him during long drives and traveling Sankirtan. He was dear to them because he had a sense of humor too. Jambavan recalls being awakened one night at midnight by Jayananda. "Wake up," said Jayananda. "I've got a benediction for you." He then pushed a big samosa into the sleepy Jambavan's mouth. Expert at engaging everyone. Jayananda was very eager to see everyone engaged in Krishna's service. He once wrote, "When I reflect on my consciousness, had I not had association with devotees and Srila Prabhupada, I shudder to imagine the nightmare I would be in. If we could become a little dedicated to distributing the mercy, so many could be saved so much suffering." Because of his genuine compassion, Krishna gave Jayananda the unique ability to make people want to serve Krishna directly or indirectly. Whenever a new bhakta would come, Jayananda made him feel that he was engaged in important work. Jayananda was older, bigger, and stronger than just about anyone in the temple, and everyone was glad to be working under him. He was willing to let people do things their own way without getting finicky about details, unless somebody's creativity interfered with practical necessity. New bhakta or old, everyone felt satisfied after a day's work with Jayananda. This was especially evident during Rath Yatra time. Jayananda would organize a crew of cynics, bloopers, uncooperative personalities, and non-devotees off the street to build the Rath carts. Although many of his men sat down for a smoke during breaks, he would get them to work 10, 12, or 14 hours a day. He was always glorifying others and working hard himself. In fact, he worked harder than anyone else. All those qualities made him very inspiring to work with. Moreover, there was something very personal about Jayananda that made everyone want to help him. Once he and Maharaj Das were struggling to load a heavy refrigerator on a truck. Two drunks were walking up the alley, and Jayananda said, "I'm going to give them a chance to do some devotional service." His enthusiasm for devotional service was usually contagious, and this was no exception. Those drunks were right in there helping, and the job was done in no time. Afterwards, as usual, Jayananda said to the drunks, "Now say Hare. Now say Krishna. Now say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Jai Hari Bol. Thank you, fellas. All glories to Srila Prabhupada." Jayananda's frugality. Jayananda was well known as a transcendental miser. He hated to spend any of Prabhupada's money. Personally, he had almost no possessions, even during his years as a householder. When he was on the road selling incense, he would sleep in the car or on a beach, or sometimes with friends he'd make in various cities. Many of these friends, such as Maharaj Das and Jiva Das, later became devotees as a result of Jayananda's preaching. Jayananda would use his personal charm with people to get them to give everything free or at a discount for Krishna. Without spending huge sums of money, he would personally collect nearly all the bhoga, flowers, lumber, paint, and everything else needed to put on the Rath Yatra each year. One year there were hundreds of devotees at the temple to feed just before the festival. Jayananda went to see one of his famous friends at the produce market, Banana King Louis. Now, I know you didn't hear about him this morning. Banana King Louis. Jayananda came back with 4 free truckloads of bananas and first-class pineapples. Coupled with some donated milk products, the devotees ate bananas, pineapples, and cream as much as anyone could eat, all for free. Jayananda would get almost anything done for free, such as printing, advertising, and mimeographing for Rath Yatra publicity. Run out of time. What he couldn't get for free, he'd get at a discount. And when he paid, he'd get his money's worth. For example, after the festival would end, he'd rent a big truck and with which to haul all the equipment back to the temple. Although the devotees would be exhausted after weeks of hard work, he'd insist that everyone come out and help pack things away, lest he have to keep the truck another day and pay another $50 rent. Although he was a senior devotee and could have had anything he wanted, he always dressed in old dhotis and work clothes, which he'd buy for $1 per set at the Salvation Army thrift store. And then I think we just might have time to read this maybe. Jayananda, king of Rath Yatra. Jayananda was the backbone of the Bay Area Rath Yatra for years, and his experiences at each one are summarized in the 1977 Rath Yatra edition of Back to Godhead magazine. Behind the scenes, Jayananda was doing everything in preparation for each festival. He would beg food, flowers, and funds, buy materials, and build the carts, advertise, arrange for permits, and organize the cooking and serving of prasadam. Although things always went right down to the wire, he would consistently succeed in fulfilling all his plans every year. After the festival, Jayananda personally brought a prasadam cake or pie to each and every person who had helped in some way or another. Because of his efforts, the devotees in the Bay Area enjoy, to this day, an amazingly harmonious relationship with the city officials. In fact, they declare Rath Yatra Day in San Francisco, officially, the mayor. During the weeks before the festival, Jayananda would sleep at the site where the Rath carts were under construction. He would rise every day at 4 without fail, even if that meant he was getting only 3 hours sleep or less. To keep his crew enlivened, he would cook fantastic prasadam on a tiny gas stove at the site. Bhadrinarayana Maharaj remembered that and his experience. The preparations were always carefully offered, and each was filled with so much bhakti that the temple devotees would sometimes sneak down to the cart site just to get some. Jayananda regarded his final Ratha Yatra, 1976 festival in New York, to be his most successful. Here is how he described the event in a letter to Keshava Das, and we'll end with this. Somehow I got the good fortune to work on the New York Ratha Yatra. It was such an auspicious opportunity. Prabhupada was coming, there was finally a first-class center in Manhattan, and somehow Toshan got an okay to use Fifth Avenue for the parade route. John Bhavan was here, and we had a couple of other boys who worked very hard. I was praying that somehow we could just get the carts finished. Somehow, by Krishna's grace, it worked out. You wouldn't have believed some of the events. The night before the festival, Saturday, at about 5 or 6 p.m., we were raising Balaram's dome, and it was at the top when a huge gust of wind caught it and blew the whole thing over. The framework was all busted, the tubing twisted. I didn't see how we could rectify the situation, as there was so much to do on the other 2 carts. But 2 devotees who were expert builders vowed they'd somehow get it back together. I had some extra pipes, etc., and they worked all night, and by Krishna's grace, all 3 chariots were at 5th Avenue and 59th Street, the starting place, by 6:30 a.m. Sunday morning. There's no place like New York for Ratha Yatra. The parade was tremendous, as was the scene in the park. Even when we pulled the carts back to the construction site, people would come out of their apartments and bars and chant Hare Krishna. I guess that occasion was the perfection of my career in Krishna consciousness. All right, I'll go until 10 after. Jayananda's relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda said of Srila Prabhupada, quote, I knew he didn't want to cheat me, so I wanted to work for him. In his dealing with Prabhupada, Jayananda kept his usual low profile. He was generally off working on some project when Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco. Their relationship was, therefore, as Karunda describes it, one of old friends, or very economical. That is to say, Jayananda did not go in for long meetings with Srila Prabhupada, even when all the other temple leaders were doing so. By way of reciprocation, Prabhupada would invariably call for Jayananda when he arrived in the temple. Sometimes he would have to make repeated requests, and when Jayananda was finally located, he would resist, saying, no, I can't go to see him. I'm too dirty. I'm too fallen. He'd work after festivals and let others see Prabhupada. Thus, Jayananda's relationship with Prabhupada was always one of service. Service to Prabhupada was the core of Jayananda's life. Once Dhanavir asked him, how does one make spiritual advancement in Krishna consciousness? Jayananda answered, I don't know. I'm too busy working to think about it. Srila Prabhupada always appreciated Jayananda's sincere service. He wrote to Jayananda in December of 75. Quote, I was very happy to get your recent letter. I'm always thinking of you and praying to Krishna for your advancement in Krishna consciousness. Yes, I remember the old days in San Francisco. Krishna has been so kind upon me to have sent so many sincere disciples to help me push on this movement on behalf of my Guru Maharaj. You continue with your program there in San Francisco, always strictly keeping our principles, and Krishna will bless you with greater and greater realization of the importance of this movement. I am dependent upon you, my older disciples, to carry it on. I hope this meets you well. Jayananda's final meeting with Prabhupada took place in New York City at the 1976 Ratha Yatra. When Prabhupada arrived at the airport, Jayananda drove the car to pick him up. Prabhupada was sitting in the back seat, and he asked, who is driving? The devotee said, this is Jayananda. Oh, I know Jayananda, said Prabhupada. He gave me $5,000 to print my Bhagavad Gita. All right, there's a couple of more pages. Maybe I can read it next time we convene. Jayananda Prabhu Ki Jai. Thanks for listening, and hope you enjoyed it. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Bol Dhanavai.
Hare Bol.